So what I have here are two paragraph elements. Both elements have an image and some text. And so remember, images are inline elements. Paragraphs are block elements. So inside my block element, I have an inline element and text, which is also inline. Since this is inline, it flows with the text. So for instance, if I was to put this right in the middle of my text, this cat, the top cat image, HTML just treats this like a gigantic word that happens to be really high, and the next piece of text just starts right after it, right here. So what I want to be able to do is I want to float this. I want to break it out of the normal flow and move it to the right. And I'm going to do this for both images. So first, let's just do some cosmetic changes just to make it easier to visualize what's going on. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the body background color to blue. I'm going to change every paragraph background color to white. And I'm just going to put a border of 1 pixel, make it solid, around the paragraph. Now let's remember our CSS notation. This is a selector for body. So the body element, there's only one, gets all blue. Paragraph element, there can be multiple ones of these, gets background white. Border 1 pixel, it's solid. Now I want to make both of these cats elements, so these images, float right. So I'm going to make this a class. So we do a dot for class, float right, and I just give it the property float right. Now I have to assign this class property to all elements that are of this class. So I'm going to take this image and I'm going to make it class float right. And I'm going to take this image and I'll make it class float right. Now let's have a look what's going on. It's not exactly what we want, and now you're starting to get some experience with kind of the ugliness of floating and how you have to handle it. It's not just sufficient to put the word float in, you have to think about the consequences of floating an element. So let's just pay attention to what happened here. Even though this element, this image element of this cat, is the first element in this paragraph, by giving it the property of float right through this class right, it broke away from the normal flow and went as right as it could. So it's all the way over to the right alignment. Now, one thing about floating is because it's floating outside the normal flow, it can float into other elements. So in this case, you can think of this float as invading my next paragraph. And now when this cat tries to float right, this is as far as it can go. So it is floating right, it just happens to be hitting this and it can't get over anymore. So the tricky part about floating is you have to think about how to handle floating elements in terms of the other elements that it may invade. And I'll show you there's really two ways to handle this. We can do it in terms of what we call clear or what we call overflow. So let's do it first in terms of clear. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell paragraph elements how do they handle things that float on top of them. So if I say clear, I can say, hey, clear anything that's a right float. So now let's look at what happens. I have clear right. This paragraph element starts immediately after it clears all floating elements that float to the right. And in this case, it cleared this image that floats to the right. If I put float to the left, it doesn't really help us. It clears things that float to the left, but these don't float to the left. I have another option, probably the most common one. I just say clear anything that floats. There's either things that float to the left or float to the right. I have one more option that I could also apply. I could apply what's called overflow. Now in this case, overflow does not tell paragraph elements how to handle things that float on top of them. It tells the paragraph element or whatever is at this selector how to handle content that overflows inside it. That means any content that it contains that overflows its boundaries, what should it do? Now this one's a little bit misleading because I put hidden, and you would think that it would clip this or it would hide it. It wouldn't let it overflow. But the problem is this paragraph element here, when we selected it, we never gave it a height property. So in terms of style, it can expand in terms of height. So in this case, overflow, it's actually expanding itself in terms of height such that there's no overflow. And that may be what you want. Now, if I gave it an explicit height, let's say I'm going to give it height, maybe just 100 pixels. So now look what's going on. Now, both paragraphs only have a maximum height of 100 pixels. They have not only overflow from their text, but they also have this floating element that overflows. But I've set overflow to hidden, so now it's just going to cut it. So that's what we mean by hide it. It's just hidden. Another option you could do would be scroll. And in that case, it puts a scroll bar. You could also do auto. In this case, auto did a scroll bar, but only a scroll bar vertically. It didn't do a scroll bar on both. So if you do a scroll here, notice that it actually gives you one at the bottom, although it's not used, and one on the side. So put scroll bars all the way around the border of your containing element. This information is going to be very useful for your second lab.